Hey guys, so we're back with Branden. So I would really like it for you to a little expand about your process of conversion, how it started. You said that you started in a Reform synagogue in New York and moved to Houston, and I would love if you could just expand and explain what that process looked like and how you felt during it.
Okay, so the conversion process began with me signing up for like an intro to Judaism class, which, interestingly enough, just as you heard from my background, like I had some background in Jewish study and I knew a lot. Like some of the things were we would get a worksheet with different images and it's like match this image with the holiday. And so I did it and got 100%. And then there were people who literally had no idea of like what any of these things were. And I was like, you want to be Jewish, but you don't know what Rosh Hashanah is? Like, you want to be Jewish and you can't identify a symbol related to Pesach? Like, what?
Right.
And then I was like, okay, fine. I'm coming in a little bit more advanced than other students. Cool. That's just whatever. But it was an actual formal curriculum. Like, we met once a week. And for those people who were in serious relationships, like their partners were encouraged to attend with them. One, just because a lot of their partners, although it was important for their future spouse to be Jewish, they didn't really even know a lot of the stuff that like we were learning. So it was kind of an eye-opening experience from that perspective, especially now as a Jewish educator, to look back on that and just think, we have people for whom it's really important, not only to them, but to their families, that they marry a Jewish person. But that doesn't actually go any further than the fact that they've immersed in a mikveh at the end of their conversion process. And that, to me, was just such a revelation to witness that. And especially to be the only person in my class who was converting because I wanted to, not to say that the other people who were converting didn't want to. That's not what I am trying to imply. However, they were converting in the context of a relationship for whom, or with partners for whom it was very important that they also be Jewish. Yeah. And I think that provides a completely different perspective. And, New York and Houston were very different. Like, when I went to the shul in Houston, there were a lot more people who were in... there were actually more people who were not converting because they were in a relationship. They were converting simply because they wanted to.
And this is from the difference of like New York to Houston.
Yeah. In New York, most of the people who were in relationships, their partner was Jewish and they were converting so that they could get married and do that. And in Houston, it was actually a lot more people who just wanted to be Jewish, which was really cool. But it was also just, I think, a very different environment. Like the shul that I was a part of in New York was, I think, kind of a quote unquote more traditional. I'm not sure if I would really classify it as classical reform because that implies something specific, but they had a kosher kitchen. They had all of these things. The congregation where I went in Houston, although you wouldn't be allowed to bring in treif specifically, like things didn't necessarily have to have a hechsher in order to be in the kitchen, like that type of thing. So it was just a very different, I think, vibe. One thing that was always really important to me, not always, when I was in Eugene and initially meeting with the rabbi, there was only one rabbi, didn't have many options. But when I got to New York and then when I continued in Houston, it was incredibly important for me to study with a female rabbi. And I can't 100% put my finger on why that was really important. But I think, at least for me in my personal life, like women have always played a very significant role just in my development as a person. Like my mom and I are incredibly close. My grandmother and I are incredibly close. My aunt and I have always been close. And these are some of the people who had like really, significant impacts on my education. I've always just really, even women teachers, I think if I look back on it, women have always been my favorite teachers in a lot of respects. And so it was really important for me to study with female rabbis. the rabbinate here in Israel does not particularly care for that, but whatever. So, yeah, I don't know. Was there anything else?
I guess, like, my next question would be just, like, so you moved to Houston, you're in this program that you feel like you're connected to other people. First of all, how long was that process? Like, how long were you in Houston for converting? When did the conversion actually happen then?
So, like I said, I relocated to Houston, I think, in March of 2014. And then I actually didn't really pick back up in my conversion process until January of the following year. Like, I took kind of a break as I readjusted to the city and tried to develop a new social life and just all of those different things. And, you know, once I went in, I finished the actual formal conversion class, and then it was like, okay, at this point, you start meeting with the rabbi, and then the rabbi is going to assess, like, where you're at and when you can think about setting a date and doing all of that stuff. And, you know, I've always been, like, a straight A student. Like, I come in, and I'm the one who knows the answer to all of the questions, like, just that person. So going in, you know, I think on our second or third meeting, I was asking questions, and the rabbi was like, listen, I'm going to pull out this book. There's a series of questions largely based on, you know, Maimonides, and I'm going to read them. And if you can answer yes to all of them, first of all, we'll never send you to the Beit Din if we're not going to confirm you. And, like, I know that you're ready, but if this helps put your mind at ease, like,
okay.
So we did it, and she was just like, no, you're fine. Like, let's pick a date. We'll meet a couple more times before then, but, like, good. So I actually, I picked my 31st birthday. So it was October 15th, the 2nd of Cheshvan. And my mom, because it was my actual birthday, my mom flew into Houston to visit, and she, like, I wear a Star of David necklace that has my birthstone in it that she gave me for the occasion. She went to the mikveh with me. Like, my family is incredibly supportive. I come from a very small family, but their philosophy has always been, like, if it doesn't hurt anybody else and it makes you happy, like,
that's beautiful.
We want you to, you know, do it. So, like, they've been incredibly supportive, and my mom will be the first person to tell you, like, I don't understand any of it, but, like, if it's what you're passionate about, then, you know, I want you to be successful and, you know, follow your dreams. So, you know, I went to the mikveh on my 31st birthday. I had the whole ceremony. And at this point, I was actually working at a conservative synagogue. So I think June of that year, 2015, I had finally had it with the corporate job that I was working in, just hated it. And the contract that I had signed with them had expired. So I was, quote unquote, a free agent. And I knew socially I was involved in the Jewish community. And I knew socially the cantor at the congregation I had started attending. It was a conservative congregation. And he was like, listen, we have this position open. I know that you're unhappy in your job. I think you would be a great fit for this. I'll put you in touch with the executive director. You should come in, talk to him. And so I did. And I don't even think I had gotten home before I got the phone call. And he was just like, the job is yours if you want it. Like, We'd love to have you here. And I just knew that it was the right choice. And that kind of started me on this journey. You know, I was working in that position for about a year, and then they were looking for more teachers in the religious school. So again, the person who initially thought that I would be a good fit was just like, I think you would be a great teacher. We have an opening in 6th grade. Like, do you want to teach religious school? And so I started and loved it. And, you know, this whole time, I don't know why, and maybe every convert goes through this, because a lot of converts I talk to are in rabbinical school or thinking about rabbinical school, but I had been thinking about rabbinical school, and I knew that if I wanted to do that, I would need to come to Israel. I would need to spend some time here. I would need to learn Hebrew. I would need to do all of these things. So I applied to a summer program at the conservative yeshiva and got accepted, and then quite unexpectedly, actually on Yom HaAtzmaut, I got a phone call from the conservative yeshiva saying, like, we just got this funding. We're creating fellowships. Can you come for a year?
Wow.
And this was like May of 2017 when I get this phone call. I had just signed a new lease in Houston. Like, I had a great full-time job. I had a dog. Like, I had all of these things. I was like, no, I can't come for a year. Like, that's absurd. Right. And so fortunately, that same day I had my weekly meeting with the cantor and the rabbi at the congregation to go over programming and like what was coming up and all this stuff. So I said, listen, I got an interesting phone call today. I explained the situation, and their reaction was more or less like, you're an idiot if you don't do this. Like, you have to, like, come on. And so they were like, just let us know. We don't want to lose you, obviously, but let us know whatever we have to do to make this happen for you. And so the congregation was really incredible, and they put together a scholarship for me, and I continued working for them in a part-time capacity, like remotely, and they were just like incredibly supportive the whole time. And you know, during my year at the conservative yeshiva, it turned into applying for this program that I'm in now at Pardes and deciding to make Aliyah and like all of these different things.
I feel like before we go a little bit more into detail about Israel, I feel like my next like kind of big question is to go backwards a little bit. And you said like your family's super supportive, which is awesome to hear. But you also mentioned that your dad's side is a bit more religious than like your immediate family. And I kind of wonder how those types of relationships go. Do you see them on Christmas if you want to go back, or is there any type of tension, or are they also super chill like your mom and don't care?
No, so that, I mean, now that I actually think about it in this context, like my family situation is much more complicated than I think I actually tend to treat it. So like my dad's side, I don't really have a relationship with my dad's side of the family. My parents got divorced when I was like 5 years old. My dad stuck around Oregon for a little bit and then went to Texas. And then for a really long time, like we had intermittent contact at best. And it wasn't until I was in like middle school and high school when I actually started going to visit them in the Houston area, ironically. How I ended up back in Houston is just like such a weird twist of fate. Which I'm Houston ride or die, like 713 for life. Love Houston. But how I ended up there is weird when I think about the fact that I was born there and like all this stuff. Anyway. But yeah, so like I don't really have a relationship with my dad or that side of the family. And when I first moved down to Houston, I tried going out there. I tried spending holidays with them. And it just, I don't know. We didn't have a lot in common. We hadn't really spent any time together in the intervening 20 years. And then, you know, my stepdad, he and my mom got divorced, I think, a few years after I graduated from college. And, like, I have a stepbrother and a stepsister. And, like, we stayed in touch. I saw my stepsister when I was in Oregon last summer, which was really great because I hadn't seen her in a long time. And like they've also been very supportive, but generally, yeah, like
you're not really connected to that side of the family anymore, and because like your mom and your stepdad got divorced, so like it's not like you have to actually really interact with the more religious side.
No, and I think for a really long time, during the process of my conversion, and I think especially because for a lot of people it seemed to come out of nowhere, because honestly, when I went to college, this was not something that I ever really talked about with people, because as I said, it was, you know, you couldn't be both religious and queer, and there are a lot of people who to this day still think that that's true. That was not a significant aspect of my life, nor had it been for a significant portion of my life. And one, I think it was kind of surprising for a lot of people when I said like, oh yeah, I'm converting to be Jewish. They're just like, what? That's crazy. Why would you ever do that? But I think it was that experience that really taught me that it was kind of, this is what I knew was right for me and what I wanted to do. And I couldn't focus on how other people reacted. And I knew from the fact that I had initially been interested in this when I was like 13, 14 years old, and my mom had been supportive at that point in my life, that it wasn't going to be a problem for her.
Right.
My grandparents, again, you know, when I came out to them, they were just like, so? It's always been kind of one of those relationships where it's just like,
live and let live.
Live and let live, but also, you know, I think that really kind of glosses over the idea of how supportive they were, because they were always just very supportive. It wasn't just like a go and do your own thing. It's like, go and live your life with our blessing. And like, when you meet somebody with whom you're in a significant relationship, we want to know this person. And like, you know, it was never, we're not going to talk about this. It was always like, we're always here to talk about whatever you want to talk about. And we hope that, you know, you're open enough to share these things with us. And we want to be there for the significant moments and all of those things. So I think that was probably one of the most important realizations too through this whole process, was just like how incredibly lucky I've been with the family that I have, because especially coming from such a small family, like if things had gone a different way, I might not actually have a biological family I have a relationship with, but instead I have a biological family that I'm incredibly close with. So
that's amazing. I feel like my last like big question, I guess, about like the conversion process and all that is how you said that you were very welcomed by the Reform and the conservative communities that you studied in. And I was kind of wondering how, during that time period, were there any actual struggles between you and the Jewish community that you wanted to come into, or was it just all really smooth, very easy? Because I feel like, you know, every person has their own experience, and I feel like I've heard a lot more rocky stories than I have heard positive, smooth, easy stories of conversion, unfortunately, and I hope that you know, isn't the case here, but I was wondering.
I would be lying if I said that it weren't always easy. And I think one of the things too is you get to a certain point in your life and you can identify when somebody is, I hate to say the word fake, but like you can identify when somebody is saying something that they don't necessarily believe. They're just saying it to be nice or seem like they're an accepting or welcoming or warm person. And for a lot of people, I wholeheartedly believe that that's a defense mechanism, and I totally get that. There were a lot of times, even especially, you know, I'm very active in like the LGBT Jewish community, and there are times when, you know, I've met people and I'll say, oh, at the time, I work at a synagogue, and they would say, oh, Reform congregation. I'm like, no, I actually work at a conservative congregation. They'd be like, oh, how could you ever consider not working in a place that's Reform? And it's like, okay, well, sure, perhaps from your experience, you haven't felt welcome in other environments, and I totally understand that. And it's really interesting the way challenges manifest themselves in places that you wouldn't necessarily expect. And I think as somebody who's drawn to more traditional practice and a more quote-unquote traditional, or I guess sort of observant lifestyle, because I'm definitely not the most observant person. However, I spend the majority of my time in observant communities. So for me, being aware of the expectations of those communities is very important, while also understanding how I can exist in those communities as an openly gay person and find acceptance in those communities. And I think a lot of people, you know, they hear words like traditional, they hear words like orthodox, they hear words like observant, and it automatically triggers something, and they think that they can't identify with that.
Yeah.
And I think that that's something that we need to do a better job of addressing. And I think a significant push for that has to happen from within like the LGBT community itself. That's part of why I involve myself in these organizations, to really kind of push people more toward the, like, no, you can actually be both of these things, and that's actually totally fine.
Absolutely.
And you can find a fulfilling, meaningful life as a queer Jew, even in like a more traditional, observant, halakhic community. And so I think that's become a really big draw for me in terms of being a Jewish educator, in terms of being somebody who's pursuing the rabbinate, in terms of the type of activism and just community organizational work that I do. That's become a really significant part.
Yeah. I mean, it makes sense because it's, you know, it's trying to show people that your two very important identities can be combined into a beautiful, authentic self, and it's not that I'm either or, which I feel like is something that slowly the Jewish community is starting to learn and starting to be exposed to. And I feel like it's really important to consistently talk about it and share the word, and like it makes sense, meaning like it's just an authentic expression of what you feel and what you are and what you believe in. So like, why not share that with other people and try to show them what that means?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And I guess like I guess kind of like a similar but maybe like follow-up question would be, how has it been to, I guess like we can also talk later about your aliyah and all that, but to come to Israel, to make aliyah as a person who converted through the Reform movement and be openly gay, how was that? I mean, like, I feel like all the questions in the world can come up. Were there issues with the aliyah paperwork? Did the rabbinate make any type of huff and puff? Like, because we know that the rabbinate loves huffing and puffing, so like...
Honestly, I don't even know how much of it came down to like the rabbinate. I will say that between the time when I initially submitted my aliyah application, when I was approved, it took a little bit more than a year.
A year?
A year. So during that process, I had to provide additional, beyond what they generally require, I had to provide additional paperwork. So I had multiple letters from rabbis attesting to the fact that I had done conversion according to like halakhic requirements, that I was an active member in good standing of a congregation in my home community. I had to get an FBI background check, like all of these different things, because I ultimately ended up making aliyah from out of the country, even though I had initially applied to make aliyah from within the country, and it's all related to timing and how those things worked out. But, you know, there were a couple of times when I was just like, you know what, is it really worth it? Like, is this really something that I'm so excited about? And as I was going through the process, I was just like, yes, this is definitely something that I feel I need to do. It's not even just like I wanted to do it, but I really needed to do it. And at each challenge along the way, I was kind of just like, whatever. It's an additional document that I have to get signed by a rabbi and certified. It'll take a couple of weeks, some kind of awkward emails, but whatever. Who cares? And at the end of the day, like, there was something incredibly powerful about the fact that when I landed at Ben Gurion, when I returned from working in the States, like, I was taken to a special office and I was issued a temporary ID card, and you know, I was told these are the benefits that you are eligible to receive now for the next period of time. And you know, I think I cried a little bit when I got my Israeli passport. Like, it was just such an incredible experience, and it took a long time, a lot of frustration, a lot of annoyed emails between me and Nefesh B'Nefesh, the Jewish agency, like all of those different things, but ultimately it was worth it. And it was, I think if I had gone potentially through like an Orthodox conversion or something, maybe the process would have been easier. I don't really know. I've considered doing a second conversion now that I'm here in Israel. I think to a certain extent that lessens the meaning of the initial conversion that I did. Like, for me, you know, when somebody tells me I'm not halakhically Jewish because 2 female rabbis sat on my Beit Din, I say, well, your interpretation of halakha kind of sucks.
Right.
And, I can't really argue with the fact that for that person, that's how they understand halakha. Like, there's nothing that I can do to change that person's mind.
Yeah.
And, technically they're correct. So what am I going to do? At the same time, for me, I was welcomed into the Jewish people in a certain way.
Yeah.
That experience was incredibly powerful, and it happened the way it did because it was the way I wanted it to happen. I think ultimately it was the way that I was meant to come into Judaism. If you believe in this concept of like what's meant to happen, like it happens this way specifically for a reason. Yeah. And I think to try and change that would diminish some of that. That isn't to say like, because of the rabbinical school I'm choosing to go to, I will have to go through a secondary conversion. It's not an Orthodox conversion, but it is just like a...
Really?
Yeah, it's a conservative conversion, so it's just, yeah, it is what it is.
Interesting.
So, there are definitely challenges even beyond just and this was actually in the first conversation I had with Nefesh B'Nefesh on the phone. One of their comments was just like, oh, you did a reform conversion, that's great. Like, you're Jewish enough to make aliyah. You're not Jewish enough to get married in Israel. You're not Jewish enough to blah, blah, blah. And when she said that, I was just like, well, I'm not straight enough to get married in Israel either. So, like, that's fine.
True.
Not terribly concerned about that.
Yeah.
So, I will say that, there are definitely challenges. And it's not always the easiest, and it's definitely one of those things that, especially as somebody who's going into Jewish education, who's pursuing the rabbinate, who's, doing these things, you really have to think about what these things mean to you and why they mean those things. And I don't know. I don't think I have, like, all of the answers even for myself. It's kind of a journey that continues to unravel in front of me. Yeah. Unravel might be the wrong word. Unfold in front of me. But it's also been 3 years since I actually went to the mikveh, and like all of these things have happened. So I think it's a continual learning process, as I think it should be for most people. Like anybody who's actively engaged in developing their Jewish identity over the course of their adult lives. It should be something that's not stagnant. Like, you need to be questioning it. You need to be developing. You need to be thinking about these things in different ways.
Yeah. I completely agree. And I feel like one of the biggest things that someone who's born into Judaism takes for granted is the consistent questioning and that development and that growth that people who convert consistently are aware of, and that journey in Judaism. And I feel like that makes me question, like, I feel like this is kind of like one of those open questions. Do you, if we could play God for a day, would you have wanted to be born Jewish, or are you happy that you went through the process that you did? Do you think it would be easier to be a person achieving the rabbinate before or after? Like, these are just like STEM hypothetical questions. Like, these are obviously like, not reality.
The only thing I think I would have changed about my experience is when I first had become interested in Judaism, like in high school, I would have pursued it to the end then and like done the conversion at a much younger age. And I think things would have looked very different in a lot of ways. I can't necessarily say I would have preferred to be born Jewish. I think if I were, things might have turned out differently, and like I probably wouldn't be on the same path. But again, these are all hypothetical questions, and there's not really much that I can do about it now. I think going through the process of the kind of back and forth, and I'll speak just briefly about the fact that my Hebrew name is Yonah, after, the minor prophet. And I chose that name very explicitly because, one, you read Sefer Yonah during Yom Kippur, which is usually around my birthday, which, like, as I was preparing to go to the mikveh and, like, choosing my Hebrew name, I was very much in that mindset because it was that time of year. But also because I think very much in my personal story, just like Yonah does, it's like you hear this calling and you kind of run from it, and then God finds you, and there's this, like, there's the, what do they call it? the still quiet voice or whatever it is that kind of calls from this deep place and like very much speaks to you. And like no matter how much I tried to run away from it, like I always found myself coming back to it. And so I think going through that process was really, I had to go through that process. Like I don't think I think that was critical to where I'm at now, and, you know, the future of my Jewish identity and how that continues to develop. I think if anything else had been the case, it would have been a completely different scenario, and I don't think I would be like the Jew that I am now.
Absolutely. I think this is like a good way to finish this, and I would love to continue talking to you and asking you about why you chose to study and become a rabbi in rabbinical school and that whole jazz. So keep on listening to the next podcast if you'd like to find out.